Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I know you're busy, so I'm going to respect your time and get right to it. On March 26th, less than a week ago, the White House signed an executive order that, frankly, changes the game for HR teams at federal contractor organizations. And when I say changes the game, I don't mean in some vague future state wait and see kind of way. I mean, it introduces a mandatory contract clause with False Claims Act exposure on a 30-day implementation timeline. That's real. That's now. So today, we're not doing a policy lecture. We're not doing a political debate. What we're doing is a practical HR action briefing. By the time you walk out of here or close this browser tab, you're going to have a clear picture of which programs need review, where the risk actually sits, and a 10-step action plan you can hand to your team tomorrow morning. That's the deal. Let's get into it. Okay, quick but important housekeeping. This session is an HR compliance and readiness briefing. It is not legal advice. I'm going to say that once, clearly, and then we'll move on. But please do take it seriously. Here's why that caveat matters more than usual today. This executive order is less than a week old. The contract clause language has been published, but the FAR amendments haven't dropped yet. OMB guidance hasn't been issued. Agency level rollout is just getting started. So there are things we know for certain, and there are things that are still developing. I'm going to be very honest with you throughout this session about which is which. When something is confirmed, I'll tell you. When something is anticipated but not finalized, I'll tell you that too. Your legal team will appreciate that distinction, and so should you. So please, use this as your framework. Use it to organize your thinking and your review. But before you make final compliance decisions, loop in qualified counsel. Good? Good. Let's go. So let's start with the most important question. Why is this an HR problem? Because I'll tell you what happens in a lot of organizations right now. Something like this comes out, and the first reaction is, that's a legal issue, or that's a procurement issue. And then everybody waits for legal to figure it out. Meanwhile, the programs that are actually at risk, they're being run by HR. They live in HR. The eligibility rules, the selection criteria, the program descriptions, the manager guidance, that's all HR. So no, this is not a wait for legal situation. This is a HR needs to be at the table right now situation. Let me lay out 4 things that should have your full attention. Number 1, there is a new mandatory contract clause coming. The order directs federal agencies to start putting this clause into contracts within 30 days. That deadline is April 25th. Now, the obligation to insert the clause falls on the agencies, not on you. But once it's in your contract, the obligations are yours. So we're talking weeks, not months. Number 2, the scope of this order maps directly onto HR programs. It covers hiring, promotions, program participation, resource allocation, vendor agreements, and training. Read that list again. That's not procurement language. That's HR language. That's your world. Number 3, and this is the one that should really get your attention. The order explicitly says that compliance with this clause is material to payment decisions for purposes of the False Claims Act. If you're not familiar with what that means, the government is laying the groundwork to say that if you certify compliance and you're not actually compliant, that's not just a contract issue. It's potentially a False Claims Act issue. That carries treble damages, whistleblower exposure, the whole thing. And number 4, this flows down. Prime contractors are expected to push this clause to their subcontractors. And this part is new. You're expected to report any known or reasonably knowable violations by your subs. So for those of you managing complex subcontracting relationships, this just became a much bigger conversation. Bottom line, this is not theoretical. This is operational. It's imminent, and HR is right in the middle of it. All right, let's take a few minutes on the order itself. I'm going to keep this tight, just enough so you understand what we're working with. Then we're going to spend the rest of our time on what it means for your programs and what to do about it. Okay, on the left side of this slide, you've got the key provisions. On the right, the timeline. So the order creates a specific term, racially discriminatory DEI activities, and it defines it. It means disparate treatment based on race or ethnicity. That's the operating definition. And it covers hiring, promotions, vendor agreements, program participation, resource allocation, and training. Let me show you what disparate treatment looks like in HR terms, because that phrase is doing a lot of work here. Disparate treatment means treating someone differently because of their race or ethnicity. So if you have two equally qualified internal candidates for a leadership cohort, and one gets in because of their racial identity, that's disparate treatment. If your supplier diversity program gives preference to vendors based on the owner's race, that could be disparate treatment. If a manager is instructed to make sure we have at least 2 candidates of color on every finalist slate, and that instruction leads to race-based selection decisions, that's the territory we're in. Now, here's something worth noting. The order focuses exclusively on race and ethnicity. It does not address gender. That's probably a deliberate legal strategy. But don't take that to mean your women's leadership program is automatically fine under other frameworks. That's a separate analysis. On the timeline side, these dates are coming fast. April 25th is when agencies are supposed to start putting the clause in contracts. May 25th is the deadline for the FAR Council to issue deviation language and interim guidance. July 24th is when each agency head has to review their own implementation and report back. And on an ongoing basis, DOJ has been directed to consider False Claims Act enforcement. Here's a practical example of how these timelines play out for you. Let's say your organization has a large DoD contract up for renewal in June. By then, the clause is almost certainly in the solicitation. Before your company signs, someone needs to be able to say, yes, we've reviewed our programs and we're comfortable certifying compliance. If you haven't done the review yet, you're going to be scrambling. That's why we're talking about this today, not in June. Okay, that's the legal backdrop. Now, let's talk about where this actually lands inside your HR department. This is the part where I need you to start thinking about your own organization, your own programs, your own processes. Because I promise you, some of what's on the next slide is going to hit close to home. Take a look at these 2 columns. On the left, talent acquisition and advancement. On the right, programs and development. I'm going to walk through both sides and give you real examples so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. On the talent side, start with recruiting and outreach programs. Say your talent acquisition team partners with the National Black MBA Association to source candidates for management roles. That outreach itself is probably fine. Broadening your pipeline is not the issue. But what if the partnership agreement says that candidates sourced through this channel get a priority review that candidates from other channels don't? Now you've got a process question. Job posting language. I've seen postings that say things like, we especially encourage applications from candidates who identify as members of underrepresented racial or ethnic groups. On its own, that might look like outreach, but in the context of this order, a contracting officer might read it differently. Review it. Candidate slate practices. Some organizations have rules that say every finalist slate must include at least one candidate from an underrepresented group. I understand the intent behind that, but the practical question under this order is, does that rule create a situation where someone's race is a factor in whether they advance in the process? If yes, it needs review. Interview panel composition. Same idea. If you have a policy that says interview panels must include at least one person of a specific race or ethnicity, ask yourself, is that a practice where someone is being selected for a role based on their race? Even if the role is just panel member, that's still a question worth asking. On the program side, this is where the real density of exposure tends to sit. Leadership development. A Fortune 500 contractor runs a Future Leaders program. The program description says it's designed to accelerate the development of high-potential leaders from underrepresented racial and ethnic backgrounds. The nomination form asks managers to self-report the racial demographics of their nominees. That's a program where race is baked into both the description and the process. Mentorship and sponsorship. Your CHRO launches a senior sponsor program where each executive is paired with a mentee. But the program guidelines say mentees should be early career professionals from historically underrepresented racial groups. The intent is development, but the eligibility is race-based. Internships and fellowships. Your summer internship application says it's designed for students from underrepresented backgrounds. A student who doesn't identify as a member of those groups reads that and thinks, I guess I'm not eligible. You've just limited access based on race, even if that wasn't your intent. ERG-linked benefits. Your Asian American Employee Resource Group sponsors a $2,000 professional development stipend for its members. Membership is described as being for employees who identify as Asian or Pacific Islander. So a professional benefit is only available to people based on their racial identity. That's a resource allocation question under this order. Manager guidance. Your HR business partner sends an email to hiring managers before a big hiring push that says, please make sure we're prioritizing diversity in our finalist selections. No definition of what that means. No documentation of how it should be applied. Manager A interprets it as broaden your sourcing. Manager B interprets it as give preference to candidates of color. Same email, two very different outcomes. Zero consistency. Internal communications. Your VP of Talent posts on the company intranet, excited to announce that 40% of this year's leadership cohort represents employees from underrepresented racial groups, a new record. That's well-intentioned, but read it through the lens of this order. It looks like the program is tracking and celebrating racial composition as a success metric. A compliance reviewer could interpret that as evidence that race was a factor in selection. The point of all these examples is not to scare you. It's to show you that this order touches things that HR teams deal with every single day. The risk is not in some exotic program you've never heard of. It's in the programs you already run, the language you already use, and the guidance you already give. So if everything is potentially in scope, where do you start? You can't review everything at once. So let's build a triage framework that helps you figure out what gets looked at first, what can wait a beat, and what needs legal input before you touch it. This is your priority matrix. 4 tiers. Let me walk through each one with examples so you can see where your programs might land. At the top, in red, critical. These are programs where participation is explicitly restricted by race or ethnicity. Let me give you 3 examples of what critical looks like in practice. Example: a Black Leadership Accelerator that limits enrollment to employees who identify as Black. The eligibility criterion is race. That's textbook disparate treatment under this order. Example: a scholarship program for interns that says open to students of Hispanic/Latino heritage. Race is the eligibility gate. Example: a hiring mandate from the CHRO that says for every open director-level position, at least one finalist must be a person of color. That instruction creates a process where race is a factor in advancement. All 3 of those need to be reviewed immediately. Not next quarter, this week. Second tier, in yellow, high. These are programs where the language, or how eligibility is described, raises a red flag, even if the program might be broader in practice. Examples: your outreach program says it's focused on racially diverse talent pipelines. In practice, it's open to everyone, but the description makes it sound race-restricted. That language needs to be tightened. Your ERG for employees of color offers exclusive access to a quarterly networking event with senior executives. In practice, allies attend too, but the marketing says it's for members of our BIPOC community. The description doesn't match the practice. Fix the description. Your talent review process includes a diversity score that tracks the racial composition of each manager's promotion recommendations. That's not an explicit restriction, but it creates implicit pressure to make race-conscious decisions. Third tier, in green, medium. Programs that are probably fine if they're structured correctly. Examples: an open access leadership development program that any employee can apply to, with selection based on performance ratings and manager endorsement. The program does targeted outreach to encourage employees from underrepresented groups to apply, but eligibility is not limited. That's likely defensible. A mentoring program where any employee can sign up and pairs are made based on career goals, functional area, and seniority. No demographic criteria in the matching process. Good design. Fourth tier, programs that need legal review before you continue them unchanged. These tend to be in the vendor and supplier space. Example: your supplier diversity program gives contracting preferences to minority-owned businesses. That's a vendor-side program that touches contracting and resource allocation under the order's definition. HR probably can't make this call alone. Get legal involved. Example: your company partners with an external organization that provides scholarships exclusively to employees of a certain race, funded in part by your corporate contributions. That's a resource allocation question that needs legal eyes. The key insight from this matrix: you're not judging whether a program is morally right or wrong. You're asking whether the program design can withstand a compliance review. Can you explain, with documentation, why someone was or wasn't selected, without race being the answer? If yes, you're probably okay. If not, you've got work to do. Now, let's talk about traps. These are the specific places where I see HR teams get caught off guard. And it's usually not the obvious stuff. It's the stuff that's been sitting there for years, and nobody thought to look at it. 6 things. Let me walk you through them, and I'm going to give you a real-world picture of each one. First, informal manager instructions. This is the one that keeps compliance people up at night. Here's how it actually plays out. A VP of engineering is under pressure to improve team demographics. In a one-on-one with a hiring manager, the VP says, "Listen, for this next round of hires, I really need you to make sure we're bringing in diverse candidates. You know what I mean." No email, no documentation, no definition of what diverse means in that context. The hiring manager hears that as prioritize candidates of color. Makes 2 hires that way. 6 months later, someone files an internal complaint or a key TAM action. Now what's your evidence? There is none. The VP doesn't remember saying it. The hiring manager says they were just following instructions. And you've got inconsistent, undocumented, race-conscious hiring decisions scattered across your organization. This is fixable. Put your hiring guidance in writing. Make it specific. If you want managers to broaden their sourcing, say, post on at least 3 sourcing channels, including at least 1 community-focused platform. That's a process instruction. It's documentable, it's defensible. Second, legacy DEI language. Every organization has it. Here's a real example of what this looks like. Your talent development team built a Rising Stars program in 2021. The program's intranet page says, "This program is designed to develop high-potential employees from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups to prepare them for senior leadership." The program was reviewed and approved at the time. Since then, nobody's looked at that page. The program has actually evolved. It's now open to anyone nominated by their manager. But the description still says what it said in 2021. That outdated language is now a liability. Go find it, fix it today. And by the way, don't just check your intranet. Check your careers page. Check your LinkedIn posts. Check the PDF brochure your campus recruiting team hands out at career fairs. Check the slide deck your HR business partners use when they present the program to department heads. Anywhere that program description lives in writing, it needs to be reviewed. Third, restricted access programs. This one is usually the most visible and the most urgent. Here's what it looks like in practice. Your company has a Latinx leadership circle, a 6-month development program with executive coaching, cross-functional projects, and a graduation event with the CEO. Beautiful program. High touch, high investment. But eligibility is limited to employees who identify as Hispanic or Latino. Under this order, that is a program where access to a professional development resource is determined by race or ethnicity. That's the definition of what the order targets. Now, does that mean you kill the program? No, it means you open it up. Change the eligibility to all high-potential employees at a certain career level. Keep the culturally responsive curriculum if you want. Keep the partnerships with Hispanic-serving institutions for outreach. But don't restrict who walks through the door based on demographics. Fourth, quota-like wording. This one is subtler. Here's how it shows up. Your workforce planning document says, "Our goal is to increase representation of Black employees in senior management by 15% over the next 3 years." Is that a quota? Probably not. It's aspirational. But what happens when that number shows up on a manager's scorecard and their bonus is partially tied to hitting demographic targets? Now it's creating pressure to make race-conscious promotion decisions. And if a compliance reviewer looks at your succession planning documents and sees racial demographic targets next to individual names on the promotion slate, that's going to be hard to explain as purely aspirational. The fix? Decouple your goals from individual personnel decisions. Track representation data at the aggregate level for workforce analytics. But don't build it into individual hiring scorecards or manager performance metrics in a way that creates implicit pressure. Fifth, overcorrection. This one goes the other direction, and it's just as dangerous. Here's how it plays out. Your CEO gets briefed on this order, panics, sends an email to the CHRO, shut down all ERGs, cancel all diversity training, remove all demographic data from our talent systems. Now you've got a different problem. Your ERGs were also supporting veteran networking and disability awareness, both of which are tied to your Section 503 and VEV-RAA obligations. Your diversity training included modules on harassment prevention and reasonable accommodation, which are still legally required. And removing demographic data means you can't do the workforce analytics you need for your ongoing compliance obligations. Overcorrection doesn't protect you. It creates new gaps. The right approach is surgical, not scorched earth. Sixth, confusion about Section 503 and VEV-RAA. Here's the scenario. Your HR compliance coordinator hears that affirmative action is over and stops maintaining the disability and veteran AAPS, stops tracking the 7% utilization goal, stops doing the VEV-RAA job listing requirements. 6 months later, enforcement resumes, either through OFCCP, EEOC, or VETS, and you're out of compliance. Not because of anything related to the new executive order, but because somebody confused the rescission of EO 11,246 with the elimination of all contractor obligations. Don't let that happen. Make sure your team knows the difference. And that brings me to an important point that I don't want anyone to miss. Because there's a version of this conversation where people walk away thinking, well, I guess compliance is over. We don't have to do anything anymore. That is dangerously wrong. Let me show you why. Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act, covering individuals with disabilities, is still fully active and enforceable. The 7% utilization goal is still in place. AAPs are still required for covered contractors. Self-identification, outreach, record keeping, all of it continues. The EVRAA, covering protected veterans, same story. Hiring benchmarks are still there. Mandatory job listing requirements are still there. Updated thresholds took effect October 2025. Let me give you a concrete example of what getting this wrong looks like. Say your company has a contract with the VA worth $5 million. You're required to maintain Section 503 and VEVRAAAPs, track disability self-ID data, conduct outreach, and list jobs with the state workforce system. Your compliance coordinator hears about the new executive order and thinks, affirmative action is done, and stops doing all of that. 3 months later, VETS, the Veterans Employment and Training Service, opens an investigation based on a veteran's complaint that your company failed to list open positions. You're now defending a compliance failure that had nothing to do with the DEI order. You created it yourself by overcorrecting. Here's another example. Your HR team decides to remove the disability self-identification form from your onboarding process because they think all that stuff is going away. It isn't. The OMB-approved disability self-ID form is still required at 3 specific points: pre-offer, post-offer, and during periodic workforce surveys. If you stop collecting that data, you can't demonstrate compliance with the 7% goal, and you just created an audit vulnerability. The message is simple: be precise. Review your race and ethnicity-based programs, yes, that's what this order is about. But don't blow up the things that are still legally required. Know what changed, know what didn't, and make sure your whole team knows the difference. All right, enough framework. Let's make this extremely real. I'm going to walk you through 5 detailed scenarios. These aren't hypotheticals. These are the kinds of programs that exist in real contractor organizations right now. For each one, I'm going to describe the situation, explain exactly what the compliance question is, and walk you through how to handle it step by step. Scenario 1. Your company runs a 12-month leadership accelerator called the Emerging Leaders of Color program. High visibility, great curriculum, executive sponsors. 40 seats per cohort. But eligibility is limited to employees who identify as Black, Hispanic/Latino, or Native American. The nomination form literally has a self-identification checkbox. Here's the compliance question. Is this a program where access to a professional development resource is restricted based on race? Yes. Under this order, that's the definition of what's targeted. Here's what the fix looks like, step by step. First, broaden the eligibility. Open it to all high-potential employees at the target career level. Second, remove the racial self-ID from the nomination form. Third, redesign the selection criteria around performance data, manager endorsement, career trajectory, and business need. Fourth, keep your outreach. Partner with your ERGs, with external professional associations, with HBCUs and HSIs to encourage a broad pool of applicants. Outreach is not the problem. Restricted access is. Fifth, update every description of this program. The intranet page, the brochure, the executive sponsor talking points to reflect the new design. And sixth, document the change. Write a memo that says, on date, we reviewed this program in light of the March 2026 executive order. We broadened eligibility from race-specific to open access. Selection is now based on criteria, rationale, explanation. That memo is your audit trail. Scenario 2. A mentorship program that pairs VPs with early career professionals. Great concept. 12 pairs, 6 months, structured check-ins. But the program guidelines say participants should be early career professionals from historically underrepresented racial groups. In practice, the HRBP who runs the program selects mentees based on a mix of factors, including manager recommendations. But the written guideline says what it says. The compliance question. If someone reads the guideline, does it look like race is a factor in who gets paired with a VP? Yes. And remember, under this order, it's not about what you intended. It's about what's documented. The fix. Rewrite the eligibility. Say mentees are selected based on career stage, 0 to 3 years in role, performance meets or exceeds expectations, and manager endorsement. Remove any reference to demographic criteria. If you want to encourage diverse participation, do outreach. Put the call for nominations out through multiple channels, including your ERGs. But the selection criteria should be race neutral and documented. Scenario 3. This one's sneaky, and it's incredibly common. Your VP of Talent Acquisition sends an email before a big hiring push. The email says, as we ramp up hiring for Q3, please make sure we're prioritizing diversity in our finalist selections. Let's make sure our slates reflect the communities we serve. Sounds reasonable, right? But read it through a compliance lens. What does prioritizing diversity mean in practice? Manager A reads it as broaden your sourcing channels. Manager B reads it as make sure at least one finalist is a person of color. Manager C ignores it entirely. You now have 3 different interpretations of the same guidance, none of them documented, and at least one of them involves race-based selection. The fix is specificity. If you want managers to broaden their sourcing, say, post every role on at least 3 sourcing platforms, including one community-focused job board. If you want structured interviews, say, use the standardized evaluation rubric for every candidate. Score each criterion independently before discussing as a panel. Those are process instructions. They're clear, documentable, and race neutral. And they actually produce better outcomes than vague guidance about prioritizing diversity. Scenario 4. Your campus recruiting team runs a summer internship program. It's a great pipeline. 20 interns, 10 weeks, real project work, and about half get return offers. But the application page on your career site says the program is designed for students from underrepresented racial and ethnic backgrounds. Now, in practice, anyone can apply. The selection committee looks at GPA, relevant coursework, interview performance. But nobody updated that description. A student from any background who reads that page is going to assume this isn't for me, and a compliance reviewer is going to read it as race-based eligibility. Here's the fix, and I want to get specific about the language. Change designed for students from underrepresented racial and ethnic backgrounds to something like, this program is designed to develop the next generation of industry professionals through hands-on project experience, mentorship, and professional development. We encourage applications from students across all backgrounds and institutions. Then, separately, do your outreach. Recruit at HBCUs, recruit at Hispanic-serving institutions, recruit at tribal colleges, recruit at community colleges. All of that is pipeline broadening, and it's not restricted by the order. But the application itself needs to be open to everyone, and it needs to say so. And while you're at it, check the supplemental materials. Does your internship brochure have the same language? Does the email your recruiter sends to career services offices say, we're looking for candidates from underrepresented groups? Does your campus visit sign-up form ask students to self-identify their race? All of those things need a look. Scenario 5. This one is about ERGs, and it comes up more than you'd think. Your company has a Black Professionals Network ERG. The ERG sponsors a $2,500 annual professional development stipend for its members. Can be used for conference attendance, certification fees, or online courses. Membership is described on the ERG's charter page as being for employees who identify as Black or African American. So let's trace the chain. The stipend is only available to ERG members. ERG membership is limited by race. Therefore, the stipend is effectively limited by race. That's a resource allocation that flows through a racial eligibility criterion. Under this order, that's in scope. The fix has two parts. First, make ERG membership open to all employees. This is actually best practice anyway. Most well-run ERGs have ally memberships. Update the charter language to say something like, the Black Professionals Network is open to all employees who are interested in supporting and advancing Black professionals in our organization. Second, decouple the stipend from demographic identity. Make it available based on career development need, years of service, or manager endorsement. If you want to fund it through the ERG budget, fine, but the eligibility for the benefit should not require membership in a race-restricted group. And here's the big takeaway from all 5 of these scenarios. Notice what the answer was in every single case? It wasn't cancel the program, it was fix the design. Open the eligibility, tighten the language, document the criteria. That's the pattern. The programs can live. The design might need to change. And the documentation definitely needs to be there. All right, this is why you're here. Everything we just covered, the stakes, the scope, the risk areas, the scenarios, all of that leads to this, your action plan. 10 concrete steps. This is the framework you take back to your desk, back to your CHRO. Let's walk through it, and I'm going to show you what each step looks like when it's actually happening. Step 1. Inventory your people programs. Here's what this looks like in practice. You sit down with your HR leadership team and you build a spreadsheet. Column A, program name. Column B, program owner. Column C, eligibility criteria. Column D, does it reference race or ethnicity anywhere? In the description, the application, the nomination process, or the communications? You go through every program. Leadership development, mentoring, sponsorship, internships, fellowships, ERG-affiliated opportunities, manager training, rotational programs, tuition reimbursement with demographic criteria. All of it. You need a complete picture before you can do anything else. You cannot review what you cannot see. Step 2. Audit the eligibility language. Once you have the inventory, assign someone to pull the actual text from every program description, application page, internal guideline, and external communication. Don't rely on what someone tells you the program says. Read it yourself. Look for words like underrepresented, historically excluded, BIPO, diverse backgrounds, or specific racial or ethnic group names tied to eligibility. If those words are connected to who can participate, who gets selected, or who gets access, flag it. And here's a tip. Don't just check the current version. Check the cached version on your intranet. Check the PDF that's been circulating since 2021. Check the PowerPoint your HRBP presented at last year's town hall. Language lives in a lot of places, and outdated versions are often the most dangerous because nobody's been watching them. Step 3. Review your selection criteria. For every program that involves selection, who gets into the leadership cohort, who gets a mentor, who gets the internship slot, look at how decisions are actually made, not how they're supposed to be made, how they're actually made. Is there a rubric? Is it documented? If a contracting officer asked you, walk me through how you selected the 40 participants for your leadership program, could you show them a clear, documented, merit-based process? Or would you have to say, well, it was a combination of things, and the program director kind of knew who to pick? If it's the second one, that's your cue to build a real process. Step 4. Review your hiring and recruiting materials. Pull your job postings. Pull your recruiter guidance documents. Pull the hiring manager playbooks, the interview scorecards, the offer justification templates. Look for any language that creates a link between demographic characteristics and hiring decisions. And pay special attention to the things that go to managers, because that's where informal instructions tend to live. If you find an email from 2023 that says, "Let's make sure our hiring reflects our diversity goals," that's something you need to address. Step 5. Review manager guidance. This is the underground layer. The formal training might be fine, but what about the pre-hiring season email, the talking points for the manager meeting, the Slack message from the HR business partner that says, "Just a reminder, leadership is watching our diversity numbers this quarter"? That's the stuff that creates inconsistent, undocumented, race-conscious decision-making. Clean it up. Replace it with specific, documentable, race-neutral process instructions. Step 6. Look specifically at leadership development and mentoring. These programs tend to be the most visible, the most invested, and often the most likely to have race-based eligibility baked in. Pull the program charter, pull the nomination form, pull the marketing materials. If the program is described as being for a specific racial group, or if the nomination process asks for demographic data as part of selection, it needs to be redesigned. I walked you through exactly what that redesign looks like in the scenarios earlier. Broaden eligibility, build merit-based selection criteria, keep your outreach. Step 7. Flag quota-like language. This one takes some judgment. Go through your talent plans, your workforce planning documents, your hiring scorecards, your promotion review templates. Look for demographic targets. A statement like, "Our goal is to increase Black representation in management by 20%, is one thing at the enterprise analytics level. It's a very different thing when it shows up on an individual hiring manager's performance objectives. If the target creates pressure on individual managers to make race-conscious decisions, flag it for legal review. Here's a practical test. If a manager came to you and said, "I didn't promote the most qualified person because I was trying to hit my diversity target," would you be comfortable explaining that to a compliance reviewer? If not, the target needs to be decoupled from individual personnel decisions. Step 8. Align your teams. This is organizational and it's critical. You need a cross-functional working group, HR legal, compliance, procurement, and ideally someone from your contracts team who understands what's actually in your contract vehicles right now. Here's what that first meeting looks like. HR presents the program inventory. Legal identifies which programs have the highest design risk. Procurement confirms which contracts are most likely to get the new clause first. Compliance maps the certification obligations. You assign owners, set deadlines, and agree on a decision framework. If you don't do this, you're going to have legal reviewing programs in a vacuum without understanding the operational context, and HR making changes without understanding the legal risk. Coordinate. Step 9. Document everything. I cannot stress this enough. For every program you reviewed, create a record. What was reviewed? When? By whom? What the finding was? What was changed? What was retained? And why? Use a simple template. Program name, review date, reviewer, finding, action taken, rationale. Keep it in a shared folder. Make it consistent. Here's why this matters. If your organization is ever subject to an agency compliance review, or worse, a False Claims Act investigation, the first thing they're going to ask is, what did you do when the order came out? If your answer is, "We conducted a comprehensive program review, here's the documentation," that's a good faith defense. If your answer is, "We were going to get to it," that's not. Step 10. Prepare your response protocols. Your CEO is going to ask about this. Your board might ask about it. Your contracting officer will definitely ask about it. A reporter might call. An employee might raise it in a town hall. Don't wait for those questions to come. Draft talking points now. Here's an example of what good talking points sound like. Our organization has conducted a comprehensive review of all HR programs in light of the March 2026 executive order. We have confirmed that our programs are designed around merit-based criteria, with open eligibility and documented selection processes. Where we identified language or design elements that needed updating, we have made those changes and documented the rationale. We remain committed to Section 503 and VEVRAA compliance and to maintaining an inclusive, high-performing workforce. That's the kind of statement that buys you credibility. Draft it now, get it approved by legal, and have it ready for whoever needs it. Before we wrap the content, here's your watch list. 6 things to keep an eye on. First, the clause rollout. Starting around April 25th, watch your own contract actions. If you get a new contract, a contract modification, or a task order, look for the new clause. Ask your contracts team to flag it the moment they see it. When it shows up, that's your trigger to finalize your review if you haven't already. Second, the FAR Council deviation and interim guidance, due by May 25th. This is the document that's going to formalize the procurement language. It may also clarify some of the open questions, like how the known or reasonably knowable standard for subcontractor monitoring will work in practice. When it drops, read it carefully and brief your leadership team. Third, OMB compliance guidance. The order directs OMB to identify high-risk economic sectors and issue sector-specific guidance. If you're in defense, IT services, healthcare, or professional services, sectors with heavy federal contracting, you may see targeted direction coming your way. Fourth, agency implementation reviews, due July 24th. These reviews will tell you which agencies are moving aggressively and which are taking a more measured approach. That signal matters because enforcement intensity will vary by agency. Fifth, DOJ enforcement signals. The first False Claims Act investigation or settlement related to this clause will set the market's expectations for how serious the risk actually is. Watch for it. And sixth, internal pressure from your own organization. Your business leaders are going to have questions. Some will want to shut everything down. Others will want to ignore it. Your job is to be the steady, informed voice in the room. Have your talking points ready. Have your documentation ready. Be the person who can say, here's what we reviewed, here's what we changed, here's what we kept, and here's why. 5 things I want you to carry out of this session. 1. This order moves the conversation from policy to contract language. That's a fundamental shift. It's no longer guidance or aspiration. It's a clause in your contract that says you agree not to do this, and if you do it anyway, there are consequences. 2. HR programs are directly in scope, not just hiring. Mentoring, leadership development, internships, ERG benefits, succession planning, manager guidance. If it touches people and it involves selection or access, it needs a look. 3. The risk is in the details, not in your company's value statement, not in the press release about your inclusion commitments, in the program design, the eligibility language, the nomination form, the email to managers, the selection criteria that nobody documented. That's where compliance issues show up. That's where you need to look. 4. Do not overcorrect. Section 503 and VEVRAA are still active. Broad inclusive programming is not prohibited. Outreach is not prohibited. Merit-based development is not prohibited. What's targeted is race-based disparate treatment in who gets access and who gets selected. Stay precise. Don't burn the house down because one room needs renovation. 5. Start now. Not after the clause shows up. Not after legal sends a memo. Not after the first enforcement action hits the news. Now. Inventory your programs. Pull your cross-functional team together. Document your review. You have the framework. Use it. All right, that's the content. Let's open it up. Drop your questions in the Q&A panel and I'll work through as many as I can. There are no dumb questions here. If you're thinking it, somebody else in this room is thinking it too. One quick reminder, I can't give you organization-specific legal advice in this setting. So if your question is my specific program okay? That's one for your counsel. But if your question is, how should I think about reviewing a program like mine? Absolutely. Let's talk through the framework. Let's see what you've got. That's our time. Thank you all for being here. I know there are 100 things on your plate right now, and the fact that you made time for this tells me you're taking it seriously. That's the right instinct. Here's my parting thought. This is not about tearing everything down. It's about building it right. Open your programs, tighten your language, document your decisions, align your teams. And remember, the best defense against a compliance issue isn't avoiding the conversation. It's having done the work before someone asks. For additional resources and upcoming sessions, check out amoriteducation.com. And as always, loop in your legal counsel for anything specific to your situation. Thanks again, everyone. Go get started. You've got the framework. Now go put it to work.